Cerulean Warbler, I figured I'd talk about Cerulean Warblers. This is a cooperative project led by a graduate student named Doug Raybuck and collaborators from Arkansas State and Indiana University of Pennsylvania. You probably all know Cerulean Warblers are canopy dweller, intact mature forests across the Appalachian region and elsewhere. They're highly area sensitive. They require large tracts of forest for breeding. The core of the population is essentially here, kind of central Appalachians. As mentioned earlier, West Virginia has the largest population. Where we work is up in northern Pennsylvania, which is kind of periphery of the range. And I put here locally distributed on ridges and valley tops up where we are. They're extremely finicky about where they live. So they're very local. One of the reasons we look at ceruleans is that they're not doing well. They've declined by over 75% overall. You can see the breeding bird survey map here. Everything in red is a significant decline. But they are increasing in northeastern Pennsylvania. 3% decline per year since 1966 range-wide. A little less than that in Pennsylvania, but that includes significant decreases in the southwest part of the state just north of here, but increases in the east. So what we want to do is determine the routes used by cerulean warblers migrating to and from the wintering grounds in the northern Andes, and identify important stopover areas if we can. The reason for this is to better inform and focus conservation efforts because there's not a lot of money out there, so it's better to spend it on things that might actually make a difference. So what are the migration routes of ceruleans? This is a map from the American Bird Conservancy, and it shows breeding migration wintering grounds, which strongly suggested to me when I saw it that the birds do this, which they might well do. But the actual number of records of ceruleans between the wintering grounds and the breeding grounds are fairly sparse. So eBird, this is where the actual records are. Of course, eBird not only indicates where the birds are, but where eBirders are. So this suggests several possibilities. Notice the previous map did not show any birds in Florida. So this is the presumed route, but there's not a whole lot of records along the northern Mexico coast. The large number of records in Florida suggests it might do this somewhere, go down Florida and cross the Gulf. But then you have these weird outliers out here in the eastern Caribbean. So maybe some birds do this. So that's what we want to figure out. We used geolocators, which I thought was a fairly new technology, but apparently it's outdated. What they do are they're little data loggers that record time and whether it's light or dark, and from that you can figure the exact, well not the exact, approximate geographic position of the bird. The main problem with geolocators is you have to recapture the bird to get the device to download data, which as it turns out is a major problem. But then the data can be analyzed to get the approximate latitude and longitude of the bird's location. This is a rapidly changing technology. Every year they seem to be getting smaller. Of course, that also means shorter battery life. An example of some of the data that we use with geolocators, some of it was pioneered by Richard Stutchbury, one of our colleagues who works at times in western Pennsylvania. She did a lot with purple martins. This is an example of one individual who was caught in a Minnesota staging area, 25th of August. Took about a month to go down to the Brazilian Amazon there and spent most of the winter there. Then took half a month to get back. So that's the data we got. So our study sites are in Pennsylvania, in that little yellow square there. This is a subboreal section of Pennsylvania. Kind of like this is a subboreal section of West Virginia, apparently. If you get closer, we have a lowland site along the Allegheny River here, and then upland site about 2,000 foot elevation. What we did is we did breeding males with an experimental model of geolocators that weighed a little over a third of a gram, which is not very much. This is still over 3% of the average body weight because cerulean warblers are tiny. They average about 9.4 grams. So we were requested to actually assess the impacts of geolocators. This was done on a pilot basis, the same way Dr. Patton explained that you had to assess the impacts of nano transmitters on plovers. So we color banded additional males as controls for comparisons of effects. So we were allowed to do 10 in 2014, and then because of our results, we were able to do more last year. We ended up doing 19 in 2015. So here's a male cerulean being fitted with a backpack geolocator, which is probably more traumatic for the banded than it is for the birds, because when we catch them, they're basically just balls of testosterone, nothing much bothers them. So what we want to do is compare males with geolocators and without, in terms of male provisioning rates, how many times they feed at the young. We did this by doing a 2-hour video monitoring of nests at about day 7 post-hatch to kind of standardize for demand. And we looked at nesting success, whether a nest successfully produced at least one fledgling, and ceruleans fledged really young, so they look like little fuzzy golf balls. And then we looked at within-season survival of males with and without geolocators. And then this spring we looked at return rates. So here's a clip from one of those 2-hour videos. This is a female on a nest, and the male that I showed you with the yellow and white bands is coming up. His name is Sydney, and here he is feeding. You can see the yellow and white bands. He has a geolocator, and feeds and takes off. Dave won't let me show you the whole 2-hour clip. Not all of it is a success. So what we found, notice the small sample sizes. A lot of the nests failed before we got to day 7. Males with geolocators fed approximately the same amount per hour as control males, although there's a tendency for geolocator males to do better. But there's no significant difference in provisioning rates. About nesting success, here's a cerulean fledgling. Once we pass the golf ball stage. In terms of nesting success, in 2014, all our nests did poorly. We had less than 40% nest success. This is adjusted using the Mayfield's method. There are no significant differences between geolocator males and control males. We've augmented the controls here with unbanded males that we're monitoring anyway. We had very low nest success, partly because of wild weather and partly because of a lot of arboreal chipmunks, which were a major nest predator. But no differences here. Although, again, a tendency for the geolocator males to do a little better. And then within season survival, we use the mark recite method, using program mark. This is based on repeated territory checks every 3 to 5 days until the males disappeared for a week. And we found no difference in reciting probability. If you're not familiar with mark, it estimates both survivorship as well as reciting probability because they interact to determine whether or not you see a bird. But because these are territorial birds, strongly territorial birds, reciting probabilities were not different from 1, which means if they were there, they were seen. 2014, all of the geolocator males survived. I actually have 2 years of data here. We have 2015 data, just got it a couple of weeks ago. 2014 in blue, 2015 in orange, or whatever color that is here. Significantly higher success by geolocator males in both years, although not greatly different. So from this, it looked like, at least based on the results we had at the end of 2014, the geolocators did not seem to be negatively affecting our birds, compared to controls. Now, return rates is a different story. We only had 1 geolocator of the 10 come back that we know of, whereas we had half of the control birds come back. And this is significantly lower statistically, but I think this is sort of a red herring because our graduate student was very anxious to get all the geolocators out, so he put them all on in one location, the upper elevation site, almost all of them there. Unfortunately, that site in 2015, birds are showing up. We had a number of banded birds show up, training the new technicians to read the bands, and then we had a series of heavy frosts mid-May, and most of those birds dispersed elsewhere, probably somewhere warmer like West Virginia. But only one dumb bird hung around with a geolocator, and one dumb bird with a patrol stayed up there. So I think there were more geolocator birds around, but they did not hang. So we hope a higher proportion will come out. So what are the impacts? We found no detectable effects on provisioning rate, nesting success, or adult survival. We did have lower return rates for geolocator males, but I think this is because of an unfortunate non-random assignment of treatments. But because of our results in 2014, the Urbane Lab allowed us and others to put geolocators on 3 additional sites. So collaborators, you see the star, the right-hand red star there. We're sort of the northeastern part of the range. We had collaborators in Michigan, the other red star, in the northwestern part of the range, put 20 geolocators on this past summer. And then our Arkansas cooperators threw some on in the Ozarks there, in the bottom yellow star. Then we had cooperators in Tennessee, which is sort of the southeastern part of the range, put geolocators on. There's about 20 each. What we want to know is where these different populations winter, and there's 2 possibilities based on what's known of other species. A lot of warblers have very distinct wintering grounds that correspond to the breeding grounds. So for example, southern birds tend to migrate not as far, western birds tend to migrate to the west, eastern birds to the east. So this is one hypothetical example of what might happen. Arkansas birds might say winter here, and Michigan birds further south, because northern birds tend to migrate farther. And then eastern birds will be a little bit further east, but follow the same general pattern. That's one possibility. Another possibility is suggested by the genetics that have been done on ceruleans. They show almost no population differentiation across the range. They seem to be pan-mictic, which goes along with very low site fidelity for the warbler. It might look like this, where they all just go anywhere they want to and mix on the wintering ground. And that's what we hope to find out, because as I pointed out earlier, some of these populations are actually increasing in the northeast part of the range. Down in the southwestern part of the range are doing very poorly. And if the problem's on the wintering ground, this might help to identify them. So this is a preliminary result from one dumb geolocator that hung around through the freezing temperatures this past night. This is only partially analyzed so far. Grad student only got this far by the time this meeting showed up. But basically, it shows that the bird hung around in northwest Pennsylvania until early August. They migrate early. Made a beeline to Florida, stopped in Cuba for up to 2 weeks, and then worked its way down the islands until it was north of the Tarija Peninsula, which is a point sticking out of Colombia and Venezuela, and went from there down into the Andes in Colombia, which is the major wintering ground for this species. I really think there's more work to be done in Colombia, because I think their hanging around there has a lot to do with mojitos. I hate to look into that. But anyway, we hope to get a lot of more samples this coming summer to figure out, better determine where they travel and whether or not there's population of differentiation on routes and wintering grounds. So we need to recover all these 2015 geolocated birds. We hopefully will get funding to do it again next year. Our goal is to get 30 males at the first site for each of these 4 sites and analyze and identify migration routes. I'd like to acknowledge all the field work that was done and the funding.